Yep.
With the list. The first one is Queen or Princess Eadgyth. That's the one we're doing today.
How do you spell that?
I'm not going to go through all the spellings, but for this one I will. Eadgyth. Also, next week we'll be looking at the Red Lady of Pavland Cave. And then the following week after that, we'll be looking at Ljubljana woman. And Ljubljana woman's been a recently excavated body. And it takes us to another part of the world that we don't actually visit. So Ljubljana woman. And the one thing about all these historical figures, I really tried to get an equal female-male ratio, and it was impossible because women are simply unrepresented in history. I was going to do Catherine the Great, but I thought no. Then the following week, we're going to look at the archaeology. All these there's a massive archaeological thing in this week. I will find archaeology for all these people. The next one is Karaticus. So we all know about the fake fables of Karaticus, otherwise known as Caradog, being in South Wales, and then fleeing up to the Fort Oswestry and being captured by Cartimandura of the North. We'll actually try and do the real archaeological story, which bases it in the southeast of England. And then...
In this book I've just got from Colchester, it says that he did go to South Wales, and then he moved into North Wales, and then he took refuge with Cartimandura.
Yeah. No proof for any of it. Right, okay. The next one after that, we'll be looking at the wonderful discoveries made in Central America associated with Pakal, the Jade King, the king with the green mask. And the wonderful discovery of that tomb is a piece of work in itself. The way the body was found. That's why we're going to look at him, and we'll probably look at the civilization that he represented a little bit as well, the Maya civilization. And I was doing this on Monday, and we had one or two people I wasn't able to fill the gaps with. So we'll be looking at the bodies of Callahallan, which is in fact a body that is an amalgam of a male and a female mummy. Somebody's put them all together over time, but that's something else. So, and then the week after that, we'll be looking at a Chinese emperor. I think that's quite appropriate. Something glitzy and something quite swaggery with Christmas coming on. And that'll be the end of the year. So, by the way, that means that we are off for the 23rd. And
23rd is Tuesday.
You are right. We are off on the 26th, and we are back on the 2nd.
2nd January back.
Yeah, that's right. Right, and then in the new year, the archaeologist Thomas Becket, or St. Becket, basically his bones were moved a couple of times, and he was put on trial by Henry VIII. So that'll be rather interesting. Joan of Arc.
I'm
Now-
not sure if it's the same person. You have to ask him, I don't know.
What's that?
That's right.
Joan of Arc. Now, I know somebody in the room has actually got something belonging to Joan of Arc. And what I'd like to do then is Otzi the Iceman. Now, we all know about Otzi the Iceman, but they're updating what we know about Otzi the Iceman all the time. So that'll be a really good one, Otzi the Iceman. And then...
Urtsy, because it's got a bit... what's it?
I'm just going to a simple list, and I keep being corrected, and it's just like, yeah. Boudicca, or Boudica, or Boothig. We'll be doing her next. And one thing, obviously, we don't have a body for her, but it'd be nice to look at whether Boudicca or Boothig was one, or maybe more than one individuals. And we'll be sort of looking at that. There are one or two female sets of remains out there from the period. We've got lots of skulls that we can look at, burnt skulls. And then we'll be looking at the body from Cumbria, St. Bede's. And St. Bede was dug up. And they found out when they opened the coffin that, I don't know how true this is, that his blood was still non-coagulated. And the liver and the heart was still that fleshy, hard substance that it should be. It was squeezable, yeah. It was nice and squeezable, yeah. Richard III, naturally I've got to do Richard III, and the bones of Richard III. We'll be looking at all the diseases Richard III had, all the worms, all the eggs, all the parasites being moved, or was he moved? Interesting. We're told that Richard III was moved several times. Well, Alexander the Great, that'll take us into another journey, that will, because I know we've done Alexander the Great before, so take us into another journey with that one. The Swedish warrior, who turned out to be a Swedish female warrior. So we'll be looking at her. It'd be good to look at Caracalla afterwards. And with the new research being made on Shanandar in northern Iraq, with the individual that's been described as being disabled. Now they've got lots more evidence, and there's a guy that I'm in touch with, Rogan, who should have come up with his work by then about new findings associated with Craswell Crags. He's a Neanderthal specialist, so we'll be looking at Shanandar Man. We'll be looking at King Canute versus a certain female, but that's something else. That's an elusive one. Philip the Great of Macedon. And we're comparing the remains of a lost soldier from the Napoleonic War, and a lost soldier from World War One. So that'll be one lecture. Then Caligula. Now I'm very much a fan of Caligula, as some of you have worked out in the past. I don't think he was as much as a nut job as people make him out to be. Person who made.
From one nut to another.
Do you know what? You actually pay for these classes, and the person who's got to be the mug in this room is you, Ellen. Right, Julius Caesar. That'll be a good one. Do we know where the body of Julius Caesar is? Do we or don't we? Or what can we trace about Julius Caesar? So that's what we'll do. The body of Owen Glyndŵr, we think we know where he is buried. And then finally, the pièce de résistance of all those lectures must be one historical figure that is not on that list, that has to be on that list, and that must be...
King Arthur.
Fred Flintstone.
King Arthur.
Oh, fuck me.
Alan Keynes.
Oh, yeah, well done. Well, you know, we'll know that he's good with pokers. Right, okay. Any ideas of most famous archaeological discovery ever?
Tutankhamun.
Bingo, we've got to do Tutankhamun. Right. I think Dennis hasn't come today because my trousers broke yesterday and they fell down and he saw my pants.
Ugh.
So I think that was...
He's relapsed.
Dennis has relapsed. Right, okay.
Well, there's a new Tutankhamun exhibition in London, in that millionaire's place.
Sachi, I've
And
seen
you've
it
got
in
to pay
January.
about 80 quid to go in.
35. I think
What's
it
wrong
is.
with that? What's wrong with that? Somebody has to pay for the conservation of this archaeology, and the sooner that they charge for the National Museum of Wales, the better. Instead of having all the dregs and tosspots that wander around it.
Family ticket was 80.
What's that?
I did think about going.
Did you? Well, go then.
I'm going in January.
You need to go.
Friends,
See it.
Yeah,
Get somebody to pay as a birthday present.
good, yeah.
Christmas
Gillian?
present. Yeah.
Christmas present.
We'll never go to see it in Egypt, so I
Present
can't
to
go
us.
see it.
Exactly.
Right.
So now you're talking. If you want to see something, you're going to pay for it. Right, okay. So those are all the figures. Now, what I would like to start off with is a little bit of a journey from my end. And the reason I started thinking about these historical figures some time ago, and I thought, when am I ever going to get to looking at these wonderful historical figures in history? And I thought, how do I start? And I thought I needed to start with a film set I was on in London, in Holborn. And it can be Holborn if I want it to be. Anyway,
At least I don't have to spend it.
I thought we had a call sheet from an Ealing film company I was working for at the time, and they basically said, right, you've got to get to Ely Lane in Holborn in London, and you've got to get there 8 o'clock in the morning, and this was a Sunday, and I thought, oh, this is going to be fun. And it said on there, it's in a crypt, and I thought, brilliant. And then you read further down, it was in the crypt associated with Saint Etheldreda, or Etheldreda. And I thought, brilliant, who is this princess? Who is this queen? It was an Anglo-Saxon princess. And I thought, And years down the line, I'm trying to find this place, and I can't find it anywhere on the internet at all. And I eventually typed in the crypt in London, and I found it. This is one of those localities that was spared the bombing in the Second World War. And there it is. And it's basically all that's left of Etheldreda's wonderful building. I would love to enlarge on that, but I might lose it. Oh God, I've lost it. Not a good idea.
Whatever it was, Carl, I can't see it. There's somebody in the way.
There you go. Okay. So today it's used for weddings, and it's used as a French restaurant. But this locality itself is associated with an Anglo-Saxon princess that lived at the same time as the princess that we're going to be looking at today. One of those areas of history that we don't really examine a great deal, in great detail, is the Anglo-Saxon period. I did actually speak to Kishley last week, and I said, can you come back and do day schools for us? But she can't because her mum's not very well at this moment. So that's that. So, but it was a person who was very passionate about the Anglo-Saxon period, and maybe we might have her back next year to do some day schools for us. But I thought this would be a good lead-in to the figure that we're going to look at today. Very rarely in history can we visit a locality which is definitely and positively associated with a king or queen or famous figure. Moreover, it's very rare that we can actually find any bones associated with famous figures in history. This is why it's so important to look at Richard III in a few months' time, because Richard III is a figure that the headline news in 2012, we think we found Richard III's body. I've told you so many times before, the university knew it was there 20 years earlier. But it was time for the university, the archaeological department wasn't doing too well, so by releasing the news in 2012 was ideal, and Leicester University has now got a hell of a lot more people going to its university and on the archaeological courses. That's why archaeologists make news reports like these, to sort of do something for their career. I'll be finding something shortly in the next few months that I found 10 years ago. And I thought, right, it's about time that I made that discovery. It's the same as the tomb of Tutankhamun. Anyone who knows anything about Egypt and Tutankhamun's tomb will probably be aware that Howard Carter knew of the exact location of Tutankhamun's tomb probably a decade earlier. When he was told he was going to lose his job, funny enough, a week or so later, we found Tutankhamun's tomb. It's weird that, isn't it? It's always that thing with Time Team. They always find something in the last moment because they'd already found it a couple of days before. Not to sound cynical, but that's how all us archaeologists work. So Etheldreda's place in London, and what we're going to do, the crypt of St. Etheldreda, magical medieval crypt, Holborn in London, Holborn Circus. You can't get to see it unless you're a Catholic. You can't get to see it unless you've got somebody living in the street who's got millions of pounds, because it's gated. So it was a very rare opportunity, probably the only time we're going to see this. It's known as the crypt in London, if anyone wants to look this up. And I thought, can I do a whole lecture on her? And I thought, no. So who can I do a lecture on? It was this lady. That body was actually found, discovered in Germany. And so that's where we're going to go next. We're going to go to Magdeburg Cathedral. And what I need to do is I need to do that. And I know what's going to happen. So what I'm going to need to do, I'm going to need to keep connection, I'm going to have to sign in on the Vela Glamorgans not allowed to sign in webs. Nobody knows that I'm signing into the Vela Glamorgans internet server, okay? Nobody knows that. I'm not supposed to. Good. So all those images now should now show. Maybe not. All those images should now. Bingo. So in Magdeburg Cathedral, for those that can actually see this, Magdeburg Cathedral, you've got a wonderful stone sarcophagi with this lead coffin within. Now this lead coffin is the usual size that a coffin would be. It's just over about 5 foot 8 inches, so it's probably fairly the size. And this lead coffin itself was believed to be empty. It was thought for many generations, Magdeburg Cathedral, that this coffin was empty. The reason why I want to do this historical figure is she was believed to be the Anglo-Saxon equivalent of Lady Diana, because she was a very giving woman, she was a very popular woman, and even today in Germany, this princess, later to become queen, is still mourned. And you're going to tell me, Jim, you've been there.
No, I'm going to tell you, why did they make coffins out of lead? They must have weighed a ton.
They did weigh a lot.
Yeah.
And I could tell you lots of stories about lead coffins. Lead coffins are those lead coffins that preserve the bodies of our ancestors to a very fine state of preservation. So that's our form of British mummification. But when we do the Cadel-Hallen lecture on mummies, we will see that mummification was practiced thousands of years ago in Britain, but that's something else altogether. So, Magdeburg itself, the remains of one of the oldest members of the English royal family, Eadgyth, otherwise known as Edith of England, have been located in Magdeburg, Germany. A lead coffin was discovered bearing the name of Eadgyth, the old spelling of Edith. And then inside the coffin, they did in fact find a nearly complete female skeleton wrapped in the finest of silk. Now this figure, Eadgyth, was part of the royal family of Wessex, was in fact the sister of Athelstan. If anyone knows anything about English history, they will know that Athelstan is believed to be the first king of the whole of England. So she was the sister of Athelstan. And one thing I'd make clear, and I just flirted over it when we actually did the list, it's very difficult to find female figures in history. Even though there are many, it's just that the study into female figures in history is a little bit behind. You know, people have always been interested in the likes of Napoleon, King Tut, Nelson, the likes of trying to find the remains of Alexander the Great, finding the remains of Philip II. When it comes to famous female figures, I think the study's a little bit behind. So that's why in my list I've got a lot less. But I thought it would be appropriate to start off with Eadgyth, the sister of King Athelstan. She was also the granddaughter of Alfred the Great, King of Wessex. And we all know about Alfred the Great. Did I want to look for the body of Alfred the Great? Nah, let's do his granddaughter. She became wife of Otho I of the Holy Roman Empire in the year 929. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to give it a go to see if I can click on one of these, and maybe this is going to come up. It's not going to come up. Hang on a minute. I'm going to try something else. I want something in the background. I'll bring that down there. If Lynn was in the room, things would be working fine. Hang on a minute. I'll type in something else there. Eadgyth. Okay, here we go. Oh, if in doubt, go to Wikipedia. Oh, there you go, it's worked. And, oh, there we go. Oh, brilliant. There's the lead coffin. There it is. Oh, well done. I'll have to do that more often. Good. So, there she is in a lead coffin. So, she was moved around a number of times, a bit like the stories associated with Richard III. She was moved around a number of times. And it was believed that there's no way that she can actually survive. She lived in Saxony and bore Otto at least 2 children before her death in 946 at the age of 36. I don't know how old Lady Diana was when she died, but she can't have been much older than that.
37, I think she was.
She was 36?
She was 36, yeah.
Oh, right, okay.
Just 37, wasn't it? End of July's
Was
her
it?
birthday. First
Well, there you
birthday.
go then. So there's the link. There's another link.
And Marilyn Monroe.
Marilyn Monroe was 36 as well.
Yeah.
Oh my God, it's all going well, isn't it? So there's all those links there. She was then buried at the monastery at Magdeburg, and then her body was moved to the cathedral. So there was a lot of skepticism over her remains. Her tomb was later marked in the cathedral by an elaborate monument from the 1500s. And that was to be a cenotaph. It's a quite an unusual set of remains in this wonderful tomb, because it was directly in front of the altar. So you've got the altar there, and a tomb was in front, and you're thinking, this must have been something really important, because by putting a body in a chest tomb, whatever way you want to call it, beautifully elaborate tomb, by putting it in front of the altar, it tells you how important this person was. If bones were to be found here, they would have had to been moved to this later tomb. And that's what the question was: were they still there? And back in 2008, as they were examining the human remains at Magdeburg, the professors back then found we still are not completely certain that this is Eadgyth, although all the scientific evidence points to this interpretation. In the medieval period, bones were moved around as relics, and this makes definitive identification difficult. So how do we know it's Eadgyth? And the reason why we know it's her is because of Professor Mark Horton and a long-derided TV series that Keith does not like, called Bone Kickers. When Bone Kickers came out in 2008, the archaeological advisor for Bone Kickers was Professor Mark Horton. And actually, one thing I can't get hold of, Keith, you know when Bone Kickers was out, there was another series about the archaeology beyond the series? Did you see that?
I didn't.
I saw one episode of it. It was absolutely bloody fascinating. And the reason why it was fascinating, I don't know if anyone knows what I'm on about. In 2008, there was a series with a very unknown actor, Hugh Bonneville Carter, yeah, and Julie Graham, and there was a couple of other really to-be famous actors in it as well. And they were in a series called Bone Kickers, and for six episodes, you saw them trying to find Excalibur. Well, they're trying to find, yeah, that's right. So you went through the full series. The reason why the series was eventually banned is because they showed a beheading of a Muslim. And at that time, and now the series wouldn't be shown because they've got this beheading in it, and it's looked really realistic. And there were lots of complaints. And eventually they found Excalibur. Anyway, long story short, Professor Mark Horton was the archaeological advisor. Professor Mark Horton said, what we need to do, we need to introduce a new technique that we're using at Bristol University. And that new technique might be used on the identification of a body that's been discovered at Magdeburg in Germany. And this happens to be this individual here, Edith. And they started to use strontium analysis in a big way. And strontium analysis was portrayed in the series, wasn't it, Keith? If you can remember, in one of the episodes. It was absolutely fascinating. And it was to be 2 years later that they needed to move the human remains around a little bit to try and get the scientific technology to analyse the bones. Apart from the fragmentary bones wrapped in textiles inside the lead coffin, other finds included soil sediments and entire beetles. All the findings in the lead coffin itself at that stage were being studied and conserved by a team of scientists, including osteologists, archaeologists, archaeometallurgists, specialists in medieval textiles, forensic scientists, pediologists, biologists, art historians, and epigraphers. And all that led to the final conclusion that was probably 100% accurate. As part of the research, some small samples were being brought to the University of Bristol for further analysis. The research team at Bristol would be hoping to trace the isotopes, this is them talking back in the day, in these bones to provide a geographical signature that matches where Edith, is likely to have grown up. Now, did they come to any conclusions? The answer is not yet. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to show you this headline news article, which I've got a bit of an image which gives a lot more information about this wonderful figure. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to hopefully type onto this image and bring it over. And here, if we go down, there are her bones. It's quite a nice set of bones indeed. I know clarity isn't brilliant today, but I am doing my best. Just going to put this in. Right, so the life of a princess under the spotlight. She was a figure in history with a great deal of charisma. For anyone interested in the kings and queens of England, it was a touching moment when the heavy tomb cover was lifted and then the lead lid was lifted from her coffin. Was there going to be anything in it? The inscription did say that. This was the queen of the Germans, the Anglo-Saxon granddaughter of Alfred the Great. Also said on there, this is a sister of Athelstan. We know the first king of a united England. But was it really her? I was listening on the radio this morning. There was an actress called... there was an actress before 1920s called Bernard, and she was in France. She was known in France. She was a really famous actress in France before the 1920s. She became so famous because one of her lovers had an affair. She went out, bought a handgun, went down on a rifle range, went into the living room and shot her lover dead. And she got away with it because it was an act of passion, and she was found non-guilty. Anyway, years later, because she was a very famous actress, when her leg was amputated, her leg was kept in vinegar in a very famous laboratory in France. And it was later accidentally chucked out at the end of the 1970s because she had a bit of her leg amputated from the knee. Anyway, the person who chucked out this leg kept another leg, and it turned out to be not her leg at all. Although it was displayed as being her leg for years, and somebody said, hang on a minute, it was a right leg that was amputated, and the one which is being displayed is a left leg. And strangely enough, it's a left leg of somebody with a huge club foot, with chunky legs as well. And obviously they had destroyed the wrong bit of a limb, And this leg was worth millions of pounds, and the one in the cabinet was the wrong person. The point is, these mistakes are being made all the time. And to prove who is in a coffin is very, very important. So we'll try and do all these different journeys over the next few weeks. Scientific examination, the isotopes from a tooth enamel confirm back in 2010, we've got a little bit more information on this from Mark Orton, that this early medieval woman was brought up in the landscape of Wessex, brought up alongside her brother, brought up in a landscape where her diet was rich in fish, brought up in a landscape where we could tell that the strontium levels told us that she came from that area. There was no stress in her teeth, and I'm sure Ellen will know all about this. With poor diets, you do get stress lines in teeth, which can be detected in archaeology. There was none of that. This person lived a life of luxury until about the age of 8 or 9. Could this, in fact, be the former princess, the former queen of the Germans? They were able to tell as well from her bones that she was a regular horse rider. And they were able to work out that she died in her 30s.
How can you tell if somebody's a regular horse rider from their bones?
Well, hips and that's big fat bum.
So it's going to be more chunky because they're going to be riding. They're going to be keeping the muscles. Yes, and this has an effect on the bones, particularly the humerus and particularly the femur. It's those big bones, and basically with the reactant from the muscles, that it builds up more, and that's why you've got the strength. And this is why, good question there. This is why when you look at that body that we're going to look at in Sweden. When they originally excavated this body in Sweden, the femur and the femurs were quite chunky, but the humerus was really big, right? And it obviously indicated that this person had been some kind of blacksmith. And they thought, right, this is definitely a bloke, definitely. And for the best part of 80 years, this man displayed in a cabinet, who was in fact a woman. Look at this blacksmith. We found the remains of a blacksmith and the anvil and a hammer and all the rest of it. And it turned out to be a woman.
They told that through the pelvic with the female male. Yeah, meant to be. It's not very clever from them, was it?
It wasn't at all.
Different.
It wasn't at all. No. Yeah, it's particularly if you've given birth. No, that they weren't looking for that. No, they weren't.
Blinkered.
It was blinkered, right? Why are you going to look at the pelvic bones anyway? It's just no point. They were a bit damaged anyway. There's no point, you know. They eventually did that, and that's fine. But these were these hefty bones, right? Has to be a man. Has to be. And lucky they didn't make that mistake with Edith.
She wasn't
It was those
building
fine
a chariot
silks that she
crash.
buried.
No, that would have been Boudicca.
Oh.
So as you can imagine, as they open the lead coffin, an ivory silk shroud covering, or at least, so the writer of this said, imagined with narrow eyes and almost discernible human shape. And that's the point. It was really, obviously it'd been moved, but it looked like somebody that must be a woman. We're back to this anyway. Under the crumbled folds was a small, slim frame, slightly bent at the knees, like a child asleep. Obviously, they need to get into the lead coffin. Buried first in July 946, she had been buried in this tomb in 1510. As blue bloods go, she was second to none. We still don't really know at this stage whether it is her, actually. But we now, well, in this, we do now know, but at this stage in my reading, we don't. Her grandfather, her father Edward, and her brother were three of the greatest rulers in British history. In fact, when it looks at greatness, name 3 leaders in British history that have been described as great, other than Alfred the Great. There's only one other.
Llewellyn?
Bloody Welsh. English. There is actually one other, but you can work that out for your homework. It's up here, and we're going to be looking at him. I must say I was glad not to see the forensic close-ups of her bone and skull. The respect afforded by the antique silk shroud had the strange effect of giving her back something of her life. It's very difficult looking at human remains, and it's very difficult even in a modern context. I don't know if any of you have been in a situation where you've been asked by the funeral home if you want to look at one of your relatives, and it's never what you think it is, and it's always best to remember them as they were. So this is what the writer of this is saying, that it's probably best for her to look at her as a shroud. But then the bones are there, and you've got to examine the bones. We know Edith was around 36 years old, the same as a famous modern English princess, and lead us to say Diana's comparisons have been made when they wrote this article. In Germany, sources, the sources only give us clues to her charisma. She was in her late teens in autumn 929 when an embassy came to England from Germany seeking a bride for the to-be great King Otto, son of Henry I, the founder of the German Empire and the Holy Roman Empire, was to continue on. And if you want to get things right in history, this is the period that we look back on as the First German Reich. Unlike the Third Reich, English relations with the First were close and often warm. As we all know, our royal family is German. Germany at this point had been Christianized by English missionaries. And they still like to say they were of one blood. Their languages still close enough to understand each other. And what we do, that's what's going on. That's going to be the crowning ceremony. Probably a little bit sort of Victorianized, but that's going to be the crowning ceremony. And then we go to, there's another image there, where is it? There is another image there somewhere. Go back.
Crowning ceremony on a ship? I don't think that's very likely.
No! There's a ship alongside it.
There is, right?
I think it's their arrival, isn't it?
Now you're getting it. There she is as well. That's actually on the tomb. That's actually on the tomb itself, and there she is.
So is that a 15th century one?
1500s, yeah. 1500s, 1520, yeah. There she is. And she was said to have beautiful reddish hair, auburn hair as well. So, here we go. It's a nice bit of the story here. If I can get my little doodah in there.
Was that painted?
Yes, it would be painted over like all medieval work at that time. So, you can imagine, a boat arrives. But the one that we've got is a crowning ceremony, but it sort of sets the scene. For some reason, it always seems to be locking. Okay. So this is obviously the crowning ceremony, and there she is there. There's Otho, that's the crowning ceremony. But you can imagine, change the scene a bit. That's Henry I. Otho's waiting around here somewhere, and a ship comes in, right? Now, a ship comes in. Her brother Athelstan, first received an German ambassador at Canterbury, who was extremely enthusiastic about the proposed union. According to one German account, took Eadgyth aside and spoke in a loving voice to her, pouring into her heart an affectionate portrait of the young Otto. However, Athelstan wished to get rid of 2 of his sisters. Then Otto himself was 17 years old back then, and he had been bred for war and already experienced in the Saxon savage campaigns against the Slavs and the Hungarians. In the event, Athelstan sent her to Germany with her younger sister, Eadgyth. So you can imagine the vessels coming into the port itself there, wherever that is, so that Otto could choose which one he liked best. He had a choice. He could either go with the beautiful Edith or her sister. They were unsentimental about their daughters in the medieval period, marrying them off for diplomatic advantage as dynastic bargaining counters, or just to get rid of a possible source of rival children of the royal blood. Athelstan was a very popular king back then, and he didn't want his sisters hanging around that could cause problems for him. So he decided to get rid of them, but a union with Germany would be the best thing to do. The English chronicles tell us nothing about Eadgyth's later life in Germany. She was the one chosen to marry Otto. Otto fell in love with her. It was love at first sight. It was like one of those things between Queen Victoria and Albert. It was love at first sight. The English chronicles tell us nothing about Eadgyth's later life in Germany. She's a bit like an Edith Perron figure, Diana figure. She was all those wonderful figures in history. It's a bit like Joan of Arc as well, but she wasn't burnt at the stake. It's very, very popular amongst those people who loved her. But German sources suggest she was quite a hit, brave, capable and strong-minded. The famous nun and poet Garsheim wrote, she wrote that she glowed. She had a sense of personality. She had high qualities, high personal qualities. She was calm. She had a calm demeanour. She was remarkably sincere. Eadgyth also had the common touch with the people. And yet, I'm reading all this and I'm thinking, bloody hell, this is before newspapers. This is before television. This is before you'd even think that people would be using language like that. But that's contemporary with the time, obviously translated. She was so very highly regarded in her own country. The public opinion unanimously rated her the best woman who existed in Germany and in England at the time. So it was our loss, Germany's gain. So before we go on to the strontium analysis, we'll take a break. Are there any questions?
What did she do to warrant adoration?
Because she was very, very nice.
She was very basically she was absolutely loved and adored. She was she walked amongst she walked amongst the people. She was very brave. She was able to hold the throne whilst her husband was out fighting. She was able to take court for 16 years, 17 years. She held the sway across Germany when her husband was away. So she was very well respected. And that to a Germans like really firm, strong women. Okay, they really respect them. They really respect women so much they didn't like German women fighting for the Third Reich in the Second World War. They were very German women have been very powerful figures throughout history, and this is what we're seeing. Right, let's have a break now. One from Peter.
I'm going to have to look at this Magdeburg business because Aachen was the centre of the First Reich, as far as I knew before.
Magdeburg.
It's worth having a look. I'll find out what I can about that.
It is Magdeburg. I'm going to get.
That's East Germany as well.
I'm going to get an image of I've got an image of Magdeburg now, so we'll look at it after the break. Right, let's have a break now, folks. The way this is going to work out now is that we're going to look at the strontium stuff, and we're going to look at a press release from Professor Horton, and that'll be the strontium stuff done, and we'll have had a bit of science today. So right, here we go. We'll change the image behind, I think. Where is it? We'll get rid of him. There's what's going on. So in 936, Henry died, and Otto, there he is, was crowned with Eadgyth at his side as queen of the Germans. Together they survived a civil war and they run the kingdom in partnership. This was so unusual. A woman running a kingdom. So you can imagine this, but women are always seen in German society as very powerful figures. And if you look at Scandinavian society, women are massively powerful. Women are more powerful in Scandinavian society than men. It's the women who are doing the fighting alongside the men. Eadgyth's administering her part of the royal household as strong women did also. When she died in 946, the whole of the German nation mourned her with an intense grief. A foreign race that she had come to cherish with kindness. Their dearly beloved mistress was thus entrusted to the earth to lie in the tomb until she could rise again. What I'd like to do now...
She wasn't really a foreign race, though. she was the Saxon, and they were probably Saxons.
Yes, they were.
It was written there.
So here we go. This is for Pete. Pete, that's Magdeburg. That is Magdeburg Cathedral. That is Magdeburg Cathedral. The beautiful, overpowering Magdeburg Cathedral. And when I looked at that, I thought it looks very similar to a little bit like Notre Dame or one or two of the other European cathedrals. But anyway, moving on a little bit more. What I'm going to do, I want to get straight to the work from the university, Bristol University, which I'm going to do. But there's been lots of headline news about our wonderful Edith. And the few facts I haven't given you are as follows. A few bit more information about her life to help you understand the strontium. Now, we know where she was up until the age of 9. However, her father Edward decided to get divorced, and that basically meant that the new mother coming in would banish the former wife's children, and they would be usually banished into convents or monasteries, and that's where our wonderful Edith went to. Unfortunately, when they were examining the bones, this will help us when we look at the Bristol stuff. When they are examining the bones, only an upper jawbone is left completely intact, but the teeth in the upper jawbone give you the ability to have the micro sampling using lasering technology to work out those wonderful layers of strontium that have been built up in the teeth. And now you can work out not to the age of 12 where somebody has lived, now up to the age of 14, because in different waters around the world there are different levels of strontium, and we know where she was from the age of 9 till about 14, and then it was decided by Athelstan, their sister, be married off in a teenage years. We know that, and it looks like by examining the teeth for the time that she was in the convent, there is stress on her teeth. So her diet has completely changed. Her diet from this wonderful diet of fish had turned into another less palatable diet, which was having an effect on her bone growth.
Was that between 9 and 14 she was in the convent?
Yeah, probably around there, maybe a little bit more, but not too much. So
where was the convent?
the convent is at Wilton, near Winchester in Wessex. Now, Mark Horton says Eadgyth seems to have spent the first 8-9 years of her life in southern England, but changed this completely. We see this in the tooth record, and the isotope value in her teeth changes. King Edward divorced his earlier wife, Eadgyth's mum. And she was there from about the age of 9 or 10 and for probably about 5 or 6 years, and this had a great effect on her health. Now, what I want to do now is that look at a couple of other things. We know that her bones moved around a few times. This is why we're not sure who exactly was in the coffin to start off with. Now we know positively. So here we go. This is Mark's own words, so I'll be happy to read this out in full. So when German archaeologists discovered the bones in the tomb of Queen Eadgyth in Magdeburg Cathedral, they looked to Bristol University to provide the crucial scientific evidence that the remains were indeed those of the English royalty. And I know you didn't like the programme, but it was only then that strontium analysis was starting to become a science. And the wonderful thing is, for example, and this will interest Alan and those who are interested in the Romans, the medieval people, if you had a tooth from somebody, if you had 2 teeth and that's all you had, because in archaeology sometimes all you get is the teeth. That's it, because everything else is rotted away. So you find 2 teeth on a table and you're thinking, right, we've no idea the age of these teeth. In history, we no idea where these people come from. You could probably work out similarly about the age due to wear and tear, as Ellen will tell you, but let's work out where this person comes from. Let's go to the strontium analysis. Certain strontium levels are higher and lower in different parts of the world, and you would be able to work out that if somebody's a Roman stock and they eventually settled here and they fought in the army, you'd be able to trace the fact that they came from Italy and they moved here, and you can possibly identify that tooth is actually a tooth from a Roman soldier. That not only gives you where they came from and the date in history that they come from as well. You could do something with medieval teeth as well. Teeth provide remarkable evidence about the early years of any individuals, and I think they're actually starting to move over to animals. But unfortunately, where you find animals, they mature quicker. They're taking a lot of liquid into their bodies, and there's going to be a lot more stress present in teeth with developing animals. So let's just use it as a human science, but it's also good to know where these animals have developed from. This is what they're finding when you look at somewhere like Stonehenge, that we find animals come into Stonehenge from a wider landscape. And there was that thing a few years ago that we were able to, from strontium, to work out that some animals had been moved all the way down from Orkney, but that's another argument. The region where a person grew can be traced, grew up, and the movement of that individual. You can work out that somebody may have lived in Wales, and then by the age of 5 they'd gone to Gloucestershire, and by the age of 13 they'd moved to London. However, people didn't move around as much as we do today, so that's it's going to be very rare that you have that. And hopefully when we do Otzi the Iceman, we'll be able to work out a little bit more about his movements. And in fact, we do know now Otzi's movements in his earlier part of his life, and the movements where he actually ended up at the ice sheet. So for the first 14 years, strontium and oxygen isotope ratios in the teeth reflect the food a person ate and the water they drank, because any animal that's eating takes on water, and there's that build-up of that strontium and oxygen isotopes in what you're actually consuming, and that then is then related into your bone development and development in regards to your teeth. When rock forms, they contain minute traces of radioactive rubidium 87, which decays to strontium 87. So rubidium, its chemical signature changes to strontium. Over millions of years, the ratio of strontium 87 to the stable isotope strontium 86 changes. So in very old rocks, the ratio will be smaller than in very young rocks, the ratio will be smaller than in very old rocks. In other words, bog standard science there. Some parts of the world have carboniferous rocks, some have granite rocks, some have limestone rock. All those rocks are of different dates. In different parts of the world, you're going to have different strontium signatures. It's the strontium signatures that make it into the water system that we all drink. In other words, by working out what the levels of strontium are associated with those rocks, you're able to work out where people come from. It's as simple as that. There's no major car crash on that. These rocks weather and become the soils where animals are grazed and crops grow, and the water we drink. Some of the strontium in the soil gets into the meat and cereals produced from it, and then into the teeth of the people who eat them, and all obviously the animals as well. The strontium ratio in a person's teeth thus mirrors the strontium ratio of the geology of the area in which they spend their childhood. A direct It's basically when you're looking at, say, for example, when there were Chernobyl went up, you were able to work out all the radioactivity that was spread into different areas in the soil, and you can probably work out when people were born because of certain levels of radioactivity caused by Chernobyl, and so on and so on. That's the science behind radiocarbon dating. We can't really radiocarbon date anything from after 1950 odd, because there's different radioactivity in the atmosphere. This is why radiocarbon date is used to great effect before the 1950s. Another class. For example, somebody who grew up in southern England would have a much lower ratio of strontium than someone from the Highlands of Scotland, where the rocks are much older. And then you get the science. A low strontium reading is basically where you have young rocks. A high strontium reading is where you have old rocks. So if you go to North Wales, Kathy, you will have a very high strontium reading. And being from South Wales, I'm going to have a very low strontium reading. And from the South Coast, I don't know if anyone's from the South Coast, you're going to have a much lower strontium reading because there's different rocks. Somewhere like Norfolk, where you've got all that alluvial stuff there, all those different strontium levels. The rainfall of the area is also echoed in tooth enamel. Water contains oxygen isotopes with different masses, and the lighter isotopes evaporate before the heavier ones. This means that when the sun shines on the ocean and creates clouds, those clouds have more oxygen-16 than the ocean, however. So looking at the strontium levels associated with these and the isotopes by eating fish, hence she ate a lot of fish. You can work out that in the teeth as well. And basically, so you've got two things. You've got strontium and oxygen isotopes here. And I'll try and get this one across. We weren't really going to do the oxygen isotopes, so I'll try and do this one here. Thus, in the case of Northern Europe, where most of the rainwater is evaporated from the Atlantic and blown across the continent in a westerly direction, the rain with more of the heavier oxygen isotopes fall in Ireland. So if you've got these heavy oxygen isotopes associated with your teeth, you can tell you come from Ireland. So you've got two ways of tracking things here. And the amount of oxygen 18 in the rain gradually decreases as the weather system moves across Europe. So if you've got lower of these oxygen isotopes in your teeth, tooth enamel, for example, that proves you're probably from somewhere like the deep depths of Germany. Otzi the Iceman would have a lower oxygen isotope value than somebody like Kathy. So you've got two ways. It's a scratch and sniff. Where radiocarbon dating, you've got one technique. This is two techniques that can be identified at the same time by looking at those individual layers. So the Magleberg remains that we've been doing. So it's sort of recapping a little bit, but let's try and get the science into our minds. Archaeologists at the University of, I can't pronounce this word, M-A-I-N-Z? Mainz, okay. Took a few average values of the strontium isotopes in teeth found in Etheldreda's tomb and compared them with those of other Magleberg burials. You know what the answer's going to be, don't you? The isotope ratios were completely different. So she was not from Magleberg. That was the first clue. Thus indicating that Edith's teeth did not belong to someone who grew up in the area. So that's the first one. That's the very first one. It was a lower isotopic ratio in regards to the oxygen, and she did. It was higher because the local people had a lower isotope oxygen in their teeth. To discover where exactly the individual came from, however, the German team needed to call on Bristol University. And this is where the wonderful Professor Mark Horton comes in. So what they've been doing, they've been developing this, and they've over that period, bone kickers. It was great that they used that in there. They used that in bone kickers before Time Team. I know bone kickers is a bit of fantasy, but there you go. Dr. Pipe, working for Professor Horton, has been perfecting a new microsampling technique which involves using a laser to take tiny samples from along the growth axle of a tooth. As tooth enamel is formed incrementally from the crown, a series of isotopes represented every year, every month, and possibly every week of a person's life is laid down layer by layer in the enamel. It's unlikely that your food is going to change very much from week to week. It's going to change dramatically from month to month, however. Using the laser allows for up to 2,000 measurements to be taken from a single tooth. 2,000 measurements. So you're able to get those fine layers. Earlier techniques only allowed 4. So it wasn't really effective. But now 2,000 measurements. And I know that's increased now. Because your teeth are still growing up to the age of 14 and some beyond. The isotopic value taken from erupting, yeah, that's right, because they're already formed, but as they come out, the enamel is still forming, that's what I meant. Isotopic values taken from Edith's teeth were compared with those on the Natural Environment Research Council's geological map of strontium ratios across Britain. This is the thing, we can only do this strontium analysis where we've got the evidence, where we've got the data. Right, so if you're trying to use strontium analysis in somewhere like Brazil or North America, these places, unless they've got a database, you can't really do it. It's the same as dendrochronology. When you've got the trees, you can work out the tree rings and so on, as long as you've got a bank. So what we've got, it's saying, combining the results, pinpointed the chalk regions of southern England as a place where this individual grew up, Edith. The truly remarkable discovery, however, was that these isotope results closely mirrored the facts of Edith's childhood and adolescence known from historical records. So in other words, the archaeology science matched the history, which is very rare. As archaeology disagrees with history, as you know, I said many times, variable strontium ratios in the tooth enamel laid down in Edith's early years indicate that during this period she lived in a number of different locations. And that's interesting. I haven't mentioned that. We know, to be close to her father, Edward, over those 9 years, she moved around. Because that was the in thing. Princes in a tower and all the rest of it. Don't get disconnected from your parents. Much later on. But children went around with their parents because they may have been bumped off. Because it's only your dad who's going to protect you. Unless the wicked stepmother comes in who wants you banished. The isotope values then became constant, suggesting that from the age of 9, she stayed in the same place. That's the other thing as well, with a completely different diet, not as rich as before. So she was set in one place. Those traumas, those levels of build-up on her teeth were all associated with being banished to this monastery near Winchester, where she lived for a number of years. We're not sure how long. Now, the isotopic revolution, this will help us a little bit later on. The technique that identified on Edith's teeth, both human and animal, from a number of archaeological sites are now being examined. The remains of cattle from a Neolithic village in the Swiss Alps, fossil orangutans in Borneo, and 13 victims of a 4,500-year-old massacre in Germany are all being examined with unexpected results. For example, the fairly constant isotope values of an orangutan's teeth suggest the animals didn't move from place to place as much as researchers had assumed, as orangutans are forced to move to more and more places today because of the cutting down of their rainforest. So this is helping us. Isotopic analysis allows these remains to speak in ways previously unimagined. In the case of various burials from around the world, you're able to work out, for example, there's a place in Africa known as Ulai, and in places Ulai, they're able to work out that women were taken over long distances to meet their husbands, usually abducted from a village 50 kilometres away and brought into the village. So they're able to work out all these wonderful things by looking at the human remains. To be able to tell in such detail what people and animals were doing from year to year isn't remarkable. It is a true revolution. It is. But it's costly and it's still expensive. You can't just look up the teeth and say, we know that person went from there. I can do that with a bit of pottery, but I can't do that with a tooth. The science of skeletons is allowing archaeologists to gain information about what happened to people throughout their lives, not just at the time of their deaths. It's like someone discovering a new type of artifact that has never been seen before. These objects happen to be isotopes, but thanks to cutting-edge science, we're able to meet those frontiers. So what? Just sort of in conclusion about Eadgyth, we now know it is Eadgyth because of all these techniques that have been undertaken on them, using all that scientific analysis, not just taking the word written on the coffin. The remains of Queen Eadgyth are in this sarcophagus. Not just believing that. So many times in history, I've given you examples where people have just believed what they've been looking at. Great example of that is when somebody would go from village to village with a piece of wood saying, this is from the Holy Cross. And then somebody would be doing the same in another village, and people believed that was tiny bit of wood was the bit of wood that was used for Jesus Christ to be nailed upon, right? People believed it because they were told it, right? You can't believe what you're told in history. Even in the Second World War, I've been doing a lot more research on the Second World War, and what I've been finding, lots of what the official versions of the Second World War are not in fact what was actually going on. And it's science that's helping with that. Anthropological study carried out at the University of Mainz confirmed that they belonged to a single female individual. One of the femur heads showed evidence that the individual was a frequent horse rider, thus hinting at nobility. An isotopic analysis suggested that she enjoyed a high protein diet, including a large quantity of fish, which would also indicate a high status aristocratic lady. Data of the associated textiles in the lead box produced the correct range of dates also. And the key evidence is that the bones indeed, by looking at the teeth and all the evidence put together, are in fact Eadgyth's mortal remains. These are in fact Edith, the prince of the Anglo-Saxons, later the queen of the Germans. Are there any questions on that today?
Do you think isotope analysis will be as relevant in the future for now, because we're importing our food from all over the world, and our water, for example, like Birmingham's water comes from Wales, so
it's not going to be. I think what they will need to do, they will need to come up with other techniques, and we can't even postulate this now. But you are right. From the 1950s, after 1950s, radiocarbon dating is obsolete. Probably movement of people from about the 1980s is going to be obsolete. We've got people from Africa in this country. We've got people from this country in Africa. How do you track all that? So yeah, that's going to be a difficult one. Any other questions? Kathy?
What do they want to open the coffin for anyway?
To prove that it is Edith. They needed to prove it.
So where is she now?
She's actually there. No, what they did. No, this is the great thing.
Did they put her back?
Yes. Yes, they did. Because the one image that we do see, if we
that fabric would have been ripped,
all that there, no, it was in a really good state of preservation. Everything they found in the coffin was put back there. Everything, except the samples that were destroyed in connection with the scientific dating. Any other questions? What's that?
Even beetles.
I'm not sure.
Was it like an actual coffin with a lid, or was it sealed like a
it was lead. They've now put it in a titanium box. It's in a lead coffin. It was completely sealed in a lead coffin. It was sealed.
Because there's about periodic composition, we've used the oxygen.
It would have, but the body, but the bones themselves survived. But the problem is, no, hang on a minute. She decomposed. She decomposed before she'd been put in a lead coffin. So the lead coffin was like. Are there any other questions? Well, whilst Dennis and Alan and Lee just stay behind, have you all enjoyed today? Was this the way to go? Good. Thank you very much. I'll see you all next week.